Good morning. Ready for the jury?
State's ready.
Yes, sir. Defense is ready.
You can bring the jury.
Present, sir.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. Day number 13, cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Is it Agent Fletcher or Miss Fletcher?
Miss Fletcher's fine.
Are you an agent?
Technically, I am commissioned. However,
Okay.
I'm a forensic scientist.
Right. Okay. Well, Ms. Fletcher, just want to go over a little bit of what you testified about yesterday and hit some smaller points. But I mean, you pretty much you said this yesterday, but gunshot primer residue is not biodegradable, correct?
No, sir. They're composed of heavy metals of lead, barium, and antimony. So they're individual particles of those metals. They are not biodegradable.
So if gunshot primer residue is on a surface, it will stay on that surface and will not degrade for hundreds of years.
Potentially, there's not studies that go out that far, but potentially.
Right. But the only way that current science knows to get primer gunshot residue off of anything is through cleaning, wiping it off, scrubbing it off, spraying it off. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And it comes out when a gun is shot, right?
Yes, that's how gunshot primer residue is formed. It comes out through the muzzle and in a semi-automatic through the ejector port or through a revolver through the muzzle gap. So any opening within the gun, it'll come out.
Yeah, so the gunshot primer residue will follow the projectile, whether it's pellets or a bullet, out the barrel of the gun, rifle, or pistol, will it not?
Yes, sir, it will.
And then if you have a semi-automatic rifle or shotgun, gunshot primer residue will go follow the discharge cartridge or shell shot as it opens up, right?
Yes, sir. Studies have shown as far as about 60 feet. Beyond that, they haven't been studied.
Okay. So within 60 feet of a gun being shot, there will be gunshot primer residue on whatever's around there. Fair enough?
Whatever's around the bullet, per se. When it gets out that far, it's more in the immediate vicinity of the bullet.
But for sure, gunshot primer residue will accumulate on the firearm that's being used, will it not?
Yes, sir, it will.
And if it's not properly cleaned and maintained, I mean, it'll stay there until it gets wiped off by someone's hand or left out in the rain or sprayed off, right?
Yes, sir, it will.
Okay. And when you were referring to transfer GSR, is that one of the things you're referring to?
Yes, sir. If you touch a gun that had been fired at any point, then you have the potential to transfer it to your hands.
Now, this jury has seen throughout the course of the trial a number of folks holding up some firearms that are in evidence. A couple of shotguns, 300 blackout, and they've seen they've seen witnesses hold up. Mr. Meadows held up yesterday this blue rain jacket, which you had identified having 38 particles or more on it. My question to you is it very possible that where you're sitting right now, there's gunshot primer residue?
That is a possibility, yes, sir.
Okay. Now, you did some, you work in the Forensic Services Laboratory at SLED, correct?
Correct.
And there's a trace evidence operation manual pertaining to gunshot primer residue analysis, correct?
Yes, sir, there is.
And that governs you follow that manual, do you not?
Yes, I do.
And you agree with the statement that gunshot primer residue evidence is most probative in the following situations: from subjects who have not sustained a gunshot wound, from subjects who have not been in the proximity to the discharge of a firearm or admitted to discharging a firearm, and from subjects who were not found in the possession of a firearm.
I do agree with that, yes, sir.
And that's a statement of your operations manual.
Yes, sir, it is.
And you obtained clothing, which we know is from Richard Alexander Murdaugh, shirt, shorts, and shoes. And did someone under your supervision did lifts from those clothing items so that you could analyze the particles, correct?
Yes, sir. Jamie Hall collected the particle lifts off of those items.
And those and that collection was done on June the 8th, I believe, was it not?
Yes, sir, it was.
And are you aware that the clothes were collected on June the 8th?
Yes, sir, I was.
And were you aware that when the clothes were collected, they were wet?
I didn't know that they were wet until Jamie opened up the evidence, and it was evident that the shirt was a little damp and the shoes were definitely damp.
And so it's just been a few hours that they had been placed in some sort of bag, and you open it up and they're wet, and you smell laundry detergent.
That's correct.
Okay. Were you aware it had been raining that evening at Moselle?
I was not aware of that, no, sir.
In any event, you tested after Ms. Hall, is that it, Jamie Hall?
Yes, sir.
She did the lifts, and you located 3 particles from the white shirt.
Yes.
You were at 3 particles from the shorts.
Yes.
No particles from the shoes.
Yes.
And there was no particles on Mr. Murdaugh's hands.
There was one particle on his right hand.
I'm sorry, there was 1 particle on his hand. And you would agree that that amount of primer residue, gunshot primer residue found on an individual who you had been informed had a firearm in his hand when the police arrived, that it was consistent with the transfer from a firearm?
When I analyzed the evidence, I did not know that he had a firearm in his hand, but that would be consistent with somebody who had a firearm in his hand prior to collection.
Okay. Well, you learned that at least by June the 9th at 11:03 a.m. when you had a telephone call with Agent Owen, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you told him that that amount of gunshot residue would be consistent with the transfer from a firearm?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you stand by that here today?
I do.
Now, the seatbelt assembly, let's talk about that for a minute. You did lifts, you and Ms. Hall, or Agent Hall, did lifts of the buckle, is that right?
Yes, sir.
The latch plate, is that right?
Yes.
And then 3 spots along the belt, the webbing.
Yes, sir. 3 areas along the belt. We divided the belt into 3 sections and did both sides of it. And those were the 5 areas that we collected.
I see. So did you take lifts from the entire webbing?
Yes, sir. We retracted it as far as it would go, divided it into 3 sections.
I see.
And collected them.
And the results of the lifts, and you did analysis, was there's 1 particle on the buckle, right?
That's correct.
0 on the latch plate.
Correct.
0 on the belt, on any of the sections of the belt.
That's correct.
So the whole belt was 0. And And so they found one particle.
I confirmed one particle on the buckle. Yes, sir.
And you can't say how or when the particle was deposited on the belt, can you?
I cannot.
And I think you told this to Agent Owen that if Alex Murdaugh was shooting earlier in the day or anytime, at some point in time while he had that vehicle, and he got after shooting, he got in the vehicle. It has the ability to transfer any gunshot residue primer to that vehicle, right?
Yes, sir. I cannot tell you when that particle was deposited.
So if he had that vehicle for 2 years and he'd been out shooting and got in it, that could have deposited one particle on the buckle, and it could stay there unless it got knocked off, right?
Yeah, unless it was cleaned, it could have stayed there. Yes, sir.
And if he went and got a gun and then put it in the car, and then he got back in the car and he got transferred GSR on him, and they could hit the buckle, and that could put it on there, right?
Yes, sir. That could have happened.
It's just very, very small. You can't see it with a naked eye, but it stays there forever unless it's moved.
That's correct, sir. Yes, sir.
Now, you were also asked to do an analysis of a blue rain jacket. Do you remember that?
Yes, sir. I did.
And once again, just like the seatbelt, there's no way for you to know when the gunshot primer residue was deposited on the blue rain jacket.
That's correct.
It could be at any point in time from the date that blue rain jacket was manufactured, right?
Well, probably not on the manufacturer date unless they were firing
Right.
guns in the manufacturing plant, but any time after a consumer takes possession, probably.
So if a consumer took possession of that garment 4 years ago, and we're going to talk about how you can get gunshot primer residue on it, but unless it's cleaned off or washed off, it'll stay for 4 years.
It could, yes.
And you have no idea how gunshot primer residue ended up on that garment, correct?
I cannot tell you how it got there
Okay. Or when it got there.
or when it got there.
Or whether it was being worn when it got there, whether it was being worn inside out when it was deposited on there, or whether it was laid on top of a gun, for example.
I cannot tell you any of those scenarios.
Okay. So if Mr. Randolph Murdaugh, are you aware that this rain jacket was found in a closet in September of 2021 at Mr. Randolph Murdaugh's home?
That was the information that was on the submission, yes.
And he died, I think, on June 10th, 2021. Were you aware of that?
I remember hearing news about it.
But if he, before he got into his truck, had taken off this poncho and flipped it over and threw it on the back seat of his truck where he kept his shotgun bow whoop, and it laid on top of this dirty old shotgun, it could have deposited 38 particles of gunshot primer residue, right?
If the shotgun was not clean, there is a potential for the transfer off of that shotgun, yes.
And if bow whoop hadn't been cleaned in years, there would be
No objection. What's he saying?
bow whoop, B-O-W-H-O-O-P, the name of Mr. Randolph Murdaugh's shotgun. If that shotgun hadn't been cleaned in years, it'd be more likely you would get gunshot residue deposited on anything that came on top of it, right?
The transfer would be more likely, yes, sir.
Now, you also testified that 38 particles of gunshot primer residue was a significant amount. You
Yes,
remember
sir.
saying that?
Yes, sir.
So I guess then you would agree with me that one particle on the hand is an insignificant amount.
I can just say that it was present. I can't tell you that it's insignificant. It's just there.
Yet you can say 38 is significant.
Because it's much more than you would expect on an item that wasn't in the vicinity or didn't come into contact with an object with gunshot primer residue on it. One particle, I can't tell you when or how or it got there.
Well, would you agree with 3 particles on a shirt is an insignificant amount?
It's just 3 particles on a shirt, and it can be one of the 2 ways, or a combination of the 2 ways of being in the vicinity or transfer.
Yet you're comfortable saying 38 is significant, but you're not comfortable saying 1 is insignificant.
Insignificant implies that the evidence itself is insignificant, but it's a particle of gunshot primer residue. I'm not going to say that it's insignificant evidence.
Well, should you say 38 is significant, or do you say there's 38 particles in there?
Significant implying that it's a large amount, not that it's a small amount, but a large amount.
So is 3 a small amount?
Not in how many that we get normally. It's about average.
Okay. Now, in addition to the rain jacket, and I think that is item 173 in your lab, you were also provided a blue tarp, item 174. Do you remember receiving a blue tarp?
Yes, sir.
And after discussing the scenario presented by the witness with Captain Ryan Neal, you and he decided that there was no need to process the blue tarp seized from Almeida, correct?
Correct.
And are you aware that this witness was Shelley Smith?
I am now. I was not aware who the witness was at the time.
So in your conversation with Agent Ryan Neal, he says, don't worry about the tarp.
Objection to hearsay.
The objection is sustained.
After your conversation with Ryan Neal about what a witness had relayed to him, you, in consultation with Agent Neal, decided not to test the tarp.
That's correct. That was based on that the raincoat was balled up in a closet versus the tarp being folded in a container and in place in a location.
When you say balled up, what do you mean?
I wasn't there, so I don't know, but that was the information. It was haphazardly placed in the bottom of the closet.
Okay. If it had been folded and placed on top of some other items in the closet, would that have made a difference to you?
I'm not sure. That would have had to have been a discussion between the agents and my management.
Have you seen all the photos of the search warrant where it was found and how it was folded or not folded, balled or not balled?
I've seen one photo.
Okay. The one that's in evidence here?
I'm not sure.
You were informed from Agent Neal or you concluded that the supposition was that the firearm was in contact with the rain jacket, correct?
I'm sorry?
You documented that the supposition was that the firearm was in contact with the rain jacket.
They were trying to determine, I think, whether a firearm was in contact with the rain jacket, and that was a possibility given my results.
Okay. Now, you, so, do you remember what you did with the blue tarp? You just put it in storage and it's never been taken out again, to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, I don't know what happened to the blue tarp.
Okay. Did you ever have any involvement with the blue tarp after it was presented to your evidence lab?
No, I did not.
The rain jacket do you know if fingerprints were taken off the rain jacket?
I don't know of any other analyses performed on the rain jacket.
Would you have been able to tell if there had been lifts for fingerprints when it came to you?
For gunshot primer residue evidence, the trace lab always gets it first because any other processes might remove the gunshot primer residue, so no other analyses would have taken place prior to ours.
The rain jacket was slated, I believe you testified, for further DNA analysis.
That was what was on the outside of the box, yes, sir.
And because of that, you and Agent Jamie Hall wore gloves and a gown and a mask, right?
We always wear gloves and the lab jacket, but the mask was added because of the DNA request.
Do you know the results of the DNA analysis?
I do not.
Okay. were shown photos that were introduced in the evidence and of the rain jacket. And I just want to publish two more that were introduced in the evidence. 438. Doug, can you put 438 on the screen, please? I think you had it, now it's gone. There we go. Agent Fletcher, can you see that?
I can.
What's that?
This is a page out of my case file that I prepared for my technical reviewer and as part of my information to keep with me. It's a picture of the packaging, the paper bag that the rain jacket was included in, with the documentation on it, as well as the tag from the rain jacket labeling the brand of it, the size of it, and it also has our lab net information and the initials and date in which it was analyzed by the Trace Department.
Okay, the bottom of this, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a date of 10/8/2021. Is that when you took the photo?
No, sir, that's when I prepared the PowerPoint for inclusion in my case file.
I see. Okay. So Doug, if you'll go to the next exhibit, 439, please. And there you've labeled manufacturer's tags. You see that?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell the jury what size this rain jacket is?
It's a large.
Okay. And do you know this brand name? Kokatat?
I had to look it up. I wasn't familiar with it prior to this case.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Doug. Can you take that down, please? One second, Your Honor, please. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Redirect.
Good morning.
Mr. Griffin asked you about 38 particles on the parka, poncho, rain jacket, the blue garment.
Yes, sir.
You asked about the 38 particles. That's what I'm responding to.
Yeah, we just can't hear you.
Okay, well, I'll talk louder, sorry. Actually, how many particles were on the garment?
In total, there were 52 particles. There were 14 that I confirmed on the outside of the rain jacket, and there were 38 on the interior of the rain jacket.
And I confused myself yesterday. There were 13 particle lifts and 12 particle lifts, correct? And then out of that, you found the 52 particle characteristics of gunshot primer residue, correct?
That's correct.
And 38 of those were on the inside?
Yes, sir.
That's what he asked you about. 14 were on the outside?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And when you wear that garment, do you typically wear it inside's inside? Is that what it means?
I would think so.
Yeah. And he asked you, is it a possibility that a firearm had come in contact with the rain jacket, and you said it's possible, it's really possible, isn't it? I mean, those numbers are unusual, aren't they? 38.
For the interior of a garment, I would think that they were unusual, yes.
And that's common sense, isn't it?
Well, they're just not,
What is, I'm sorry. How do you describe that in your world, everyday living, and in your examining it? How do you describe those particles inside of a garment that you're supposed to wear with the outside?
well, typically people wear their clothing right side out, and so if they're in the vicinity to the discharge of a shooting, that's where the particles are going to land.
On the outside?
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Griffin asked you about, I think, a hypothetical if his father's gun had laid on it and it was in a truck. Would the 38 particles inside of the rain jacket be consistent with a recently fired firearm being contained inside?
It could be, yes.
With a recently fired firearm being carried inside of that rain jacket?
Just inside the rain jacket, I don't know that it matters if you're carrying it.
Okay, right. You're very technical and precise. Okay. But if you were carrying it and you had a gun inside that rain jacket that had recently been fired, and you were taking it somewhere to hide it or transport it, would the 38 particles inside the rain jacket be consistent with transfer from a recently fired firearm?
That is a possibility, yes, sir.
And again, how did you describe those 38 particles in your world?
They're unusual because they're on the interior of a garment.
Go ahead.
And it is a large number.
Unusual because they're on the interior of a garment and an unusual number.
Well, a large number.
Object.
The last answer for the record was a large number?
Yes, sir.
That's all.
Further examination.
Very, very briefly, Agent Fletcher, what I gather, there's just a whole lot of possibilities of what could have happened, right?
That's correct.
The only thing you can tell us is what you saw under a microscope.
Yes, sir.
You can't tell the jury how it got there, right?
That's correct.
Or when it got there.
That's correct.
And, okay, and I forgot to ask one further question. A rim-fired gun, does it produce gunshot primer residue?
Rimfire ammunition does produce gunshot primer residue. Some don't produce the traditional lead, barium, and antimony. Others do. It just depends on what type of ammunition is used.
All right, thank you.
You may step down.
Thank you.
Will you call your next witness?
Your Honor, the state calls Annette Griswold.
So have a seat on the witness stand. My name is Annette Griswold, Griswold.
Ms. Griswold, how are you doing today?
I'm doing okay, thank you.
Good. If you would, just tell the jury a little bit about yourself, where you grew up and what you do for a living, please.
Okay. I grew up in Hampton, South Carolina, and lived there for the first 18 years of my life, graduated from Wade Hampton High School, went away for college at 18, ended up falling in love with the Charlotte, North Carolina area. Over the next 2 decades, I spent most of that time in Charlotte. That's where I got married. And with the exception of a few years coming back to Hampton and a few years in Columbia for my husband to get his degree, that time was spent in Charlotte until 2012. My dad took ill and he wanted us to move closer to be near him, and my mom needed help taking care of him. So I moved home in 2012 after my father passed away. A few months after, I went back on the job search, and I'd been out of work for 2 months helping my mom. So I was looking for a job and ran into my friend's father, and he told me I should probably check the law firm. I found out that I had a school friend that worked there, so I reached out to her, sent her my resume, and she forwarded it to the right people. And 3 interviews later, I was working for the firm. And I worked as a paralegal and was hired to work for Alex Murdaugh,
Which firm are we talking about?
what everybody refers to as PMPED.
Okay. And when did you start working there?
July of 2012.
And when you started working there, who were you working for?
Alex Murdaugh.
And the entirety of the time that you were there up until the time that he was no longer a partner of that firm, is that who you worked for?
That's correct.
So how long was that?
That was a little over 9 years.
Were you the only staff member that he had that was assigned to him?
No, we have, there's two of us that worked for Alec. I had been with him, like I said, the 9 years. And then the other secretary was Christy Gerald, and she had been with him about almost double of what I'd been there.
Quickly describe for me sort of the division of labor between you and Christy Gerald, please.
I was hired to handle more of the larger cases that Alec had, where it's litigation law, and so it's personal injury for the most part, workers' comp, medical malpractice, premises liability, product liability, wrongful death, trucking cases. And so he wanted me to take over those bigger cases and handle those, and then Christy did more of the day-to-day stuff and the smaller files. Still just as important, but just smaller files than the larger ones.
You had the more complex stuff,
I did.
the bigger cases?
Yes, sir.
Just quickly, how was the defendant as a boss and a lawyer? Just what were his typical work habits, and what was he like in the office?
Extremely intelligent when it comes to the law. I respected and admired that in him greatly. He didn't keep normal hours. He liked to float in later in the late morning time or early afternoon. We always had a running joke. We never knew. We knew that he might not be there all day, but he would always show up right before 5 o'clock when we were ready to leave. So just, kept unset hours. Pretty, I sometimes referred to Alec as a Tasmanian devil, because when he walked in, no matter what you were doing, you were started spinning, because he was just coming through and, shouting everybody's name and ready to get work done when he was walking in the door. So it was kind of confusing.
Let me ask you just a little bit. The jury's heard some testimony about disbursement sheets and how they work. And can you just remind them very quickly how that works? Who prepares the disbursement sheets, and how does that go about taking place?
After I find out that a case is settled, I go ahead and start getting my disbursement sheet ready, where I can kind of go ahead and expect what the deductions are that are going to come out of it. The attorney's fees, the expenses. Anytime you have Medicare or any health insurance, there's typically a lien on that money, and we are required by law to pay it back. So I go ahead and start looking into all that, draft the sheet, and get everything on it that I know, that I'm aware of, and then it goes to Alec, and he makes any changes